Round 5 of the Norm Congress here in St. Louis. In the Grandmaster Norm section, Grandmaster Vorontsov built an unstoppable Queen-Rook battery to bust through the kingside of International Master Patel. All other games were drawn. With 4 rounds to go, Solokidu still leads the field. Meanwhile, in the International Master Norm section, top seed International Master Sergei Motsenko was raining pawns down on International Master Jobava, keeping the Russian favorite a full point above the nearest competition. Round 6 coverage starts now. Players all over the world have struggled to earn the Grandmaster title. Which players will earn a Norm? Which players will go home with the prize? Welcome to the 2018 St. Louis Norm Congress. Hello, chess fans, and welcome back to St. Louis for the 2018 Norm Congress Day 4. I'm Ben Simon along with Grandmaster Josh Friedel, and we've seen 5 rounds played so far. Today, round 6 and 7 will be played here at the St. Louis Chess Club. Round 6 is actually in progress right now, and one of the games has already finished.
Indeed. Justin Wang as white defeated Tansel Turgut in the I Am Norm section. So Turgut moves down to 50%. Justin Wang starting to recover from a rough tournament for him.
And Justin Wang has earned a Norm here before in St. Louis. And I want to talk a little bit about the Norms before we get underway. What is a Norm? Well, I'd recommend, first of all, going back to day 1 and watching if you really want to know in depth, because that's like all we talk about. But a Norm is basically a performance standard. If you earn 3 of them in 3 separate tournaments, you earn 1 per tournament, then you are partially qualified for the title that you are pursuing, either International Master or the big daddy of them all, Grandmaster.
Big Daddy, I like that.
The big daddy.
Yeah.
The granddaddy.
I'm going to call myself that from now on. Thank you, Ben Simon.
Okay, where did I start here? So, besides the 3 norms that you need to achieve, you also need a minimum rating, a live rating. Achieve this rating at any time, and that's as good as you need to be. So 2,400 is the limit for International Master, 2,500 is the minimum for Grandmaster. So once you get that once, you're good. You just need to worry about the norms.
Absolutely. In 1963, you could hit 2,501, and your current rating could be 2,300. But if you get all 3 Grandmaster norms, guess what? You're a GM.
You're in, just like that. So let's take a look at the rosters here for the players. First of all, the Grandmasters and the challengers, the up-and-comers looking to get a Grandmaster norm.
Yep, and you can see this is a pretty dense field in that it's not, the rating gaps are not too huge. Tatev's quite a bit lower than the rest of the field, but at the same time, she's certainly holding her own at +1. Stavrula, who's the second lowest, is leading the event going to this round, although she's in a bit of trouble, I would say. Even so, ratings do not mean everything in this, and it's really about who's in form.
Couldn't agree more. And the second section here is for the International Master title norm. We have 3 International Masters here. You can see them near the top. And then the challengers pursuing the title and its norm.
Indeed. And a much bigger gap. You can see this tournament, especially Motsenko, over 150 points above Jobava. And he is indeed leading with 4 to 5. However, he also could be, like the other leader, could be in a bit of trouble. So as we see in these events, you never really know how whether people are going to stay in the lead, whether the people in the back are going to start moving forward. It's always interesting to watch.
Yeah, no one is too far away from the pack yet. Now, the tournament format is one of the easier parts of this event to understand. We have 2 round-robin events going on simultaneously. And this started on Thursday. It will go through Tuesday. The time control is game in 90. Base time 90 minutes for each player, and then each player gets a 30-second increment. That's 30 seconds added on to their clock from move 1. So, what about the time control here, Josh? There's no second time control. At move 40, you don't get like this big chunk of time added on.
And I can tell you from personal experience, that can be quite harrowing because at first you think you have a normal time control, you play at your normal pace, but then when you get down under 5 minutes, you can gain some time back with the increment. It helps you out. It's not like having no increment, but it's not that much. And when you get low, you're low the rest of the game. There's no more going to the bathroom. There's no more long thinks. You don't get a break for the end, like time control to go to the bathroom, take a look, examine the position, see what's happening. You have to stay on your toes the whole game. And I would say that time management is really important in this time control because if you get low by move 20, by move 25, it's a rough day for you. And I can tell you that a lot of the players are not managing their time ideally, which is just the way it always works at any level. So.
And speaking of time, this tournament round has been going on for 3 hours by now.
Yep.
It started at 11 a.m. I want to take a look at the full schedule for this event. Remember, we're on the air every day at 2 p.m., and you'll see us live when these AM games are breaking down. But we've had a few days of doubling up here on Friday, Saturday, and now Sunday. But the players may get to take a breath here of relief because tomorrow the penultimate round is at 11 a.m., the final round is on Tuesday the 13th at 11 a.m. And folks, I cannot stress enough, tonight we've got round 7 at 5 p.m. Central Time. We will not be on the air for that. We'll preview a little bit in this hour and a half or so.
We certainly will. But first, we have quite a few interesting games to look at, so why don't we take a look at those?
Yes, absolutely. Let's take a look real quick, though, at the Grandmaster norm results from round 5.
Yes.
Just to see what exactly happened. This was last night here at the club. All draws except Vorontsov over Patel, which you saw in the intro. Patel taking the only loss from last night in this section.
Pretty solid round, and when everything's a draw, it means that the standings don't move too much. But does not mean that will go that way in future rounds. And I would certainly say that not all these draws were kind of dry affairs. Like a lot of these draws had quite a bit of excitement. The Chandra Tsolakidu game in particular, which looked like it was actually going to be a fairly simple draw, went a very long time, got to rook and knight against rook, and only in the end did Chandra hold the draw. So quite an exciting game.
And on the other side of the room last night, the 5 p.m. round, the International Master results.
Indeed. So as we see, and in general, usually the IM norm section will be a bit bloodier. That's why we like to choose red. But
that's exactly why.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
I nailed it. 2 draws, and yeah, Motsenko took the lead by beating his co-leader into that round, Jobava. Brandon Jacobson, who was 0-4, scored a win over Luis Torres, one of the players who was leading the event. So as you can see, even if you're 0-4 playing someone 3 out of 4, it's not a foregone conclusion at all. And he won a pretty nice game. Tansel Turgut moving to +1 by beating Josiah Stearman also. So quite an interesting round, and I think we're going to have more bloody results this round.
Absolutely. So, Josh, you mentioned you wanted to get to the games here. I know Justin Wang has won his game already.
He has.
All right, let's go and take a look at the games because we are in the midst of some exciting stuff.
Indeed, and if we talk over it all, we're just going to miss everything.
Indeed.
So this was the crucial moment to me. Justin Wang is white against Tansel Turgut. Justin Wang's having a bit of a rough event, but of course 12-year-olds, great thing is, usually short memories for these things. They bounce back real fast, and he certainly did that today. In this position, I thought that Tansel had a more or less normal opening position, but then he allowed an H-pawn to take on G6, which was, in my view, not exactly ideal. And he kind of got a rough position, in my opinion. But in this position, he totally got a little too careless. He played the move B5, and that allowed a beautiful shot that 12-year-old's never going to miss this. Knight C takes E5, with the idea that after knight takes, knight takes. Now, Tansel played bishop back to E6, but the idea is that after queen takes F6, after queen takes E5, you play bishop D4, and you have this nasty skewer winning the bishop back, and this would be bad news. So he played bishop E6, but now he's simply down a pawn. Notice how Justin doesn't even bother defending his knight, because he still has the same trick after queen takes bishop D4 with the skewer. Kids these days, they just don't bother. And he won fairly easily from here. Queen D6, they traded bishops. He took on G7, took on H6. Better king, up 2 pawns. He tried taking on A2, but As you can see, this king is in trouble. This rook's coming over, and it was just a matter of time before he ran out of checks. You cannot stop rook f3 check. Tencel decided to call it a day, but Justin Wang moves up. And Tencel Turgut, I would say, still having an okay event at 50%. He's one of the lowest rated in the event, but definitely a disappointing day for him. What I do like, though, is that he sort of defies the stereotype, which is that when an older player plays in an event with a bunch of young kids, he's going to be the solid guy. He's going to kind of, you know, stay tough and all this. But almost all of his games have been crazy. Yeah. He's played some really interesting chess, which I like to see, and I definitely, you know, prefer that to just playing it safe every game for sure. So we have plenty of other interesting games.
That's the only one that's over, right?
Yeah, so far that I can see, that's the only one that's over. There are plenty of others with lots of action. We might get any finish, but we'll keep you guys posted.
Well, before we get to those, Josh, Isaac, if you could we take a look at the pairings for this round, the live pairings, because Grandmaster Norm section, we didn't really look. This is the whole, all the games that are going on right now for the top section.
Yep,
okay.
And quite a few interesting ones. We're going to keep an eye on Solokidu, who's the leader, playing Daniel Gurevich. She's in a bit of a tough spot right now, but we'll see if she can dig her way out. And Daniel Gurevich in last place, he could really use a win in this game.
Okay.
Other games we would look at there, the Adi Patel game against Mark Parag WA, also very interesting. So we'll keep an eye on all those.
Indeed it is. And the games this round that are going on now, minus the Justin Wang victory, in the International Master Norm event.
Indeed. Garbinski against Motsenko. Motsenko in the clear lead, but in some trouble against Aaron Garbinski. We'll see if he can dig his way out, because otherwise he's probably going to get caught by either Luis Torres or Jobava if one of them wins, because they're both a full point back. We'll keep an eye on that game as well. As we mentioned, Justin Wang, the only winner thus far, but plenty of other games going on. I would say Josiah Stearman likely to beat Brandon Jacobson, but apart from that, we have plenty of good games left.
Okay, and let's take a look at some of those good games. Josh, what do you have on tap for us?
So I thought that we would start with this game between Mark Parag WA and Adi Patel. Adi Patel being white. So this game was just crazy. It defied logic for me. I really did not know what was going on. This position looks pretty nice for white. As you can see, black's pieces are completely disorganized. White is up pawn. This rook on g5, I don't know what that guy's about. That guy, it looks like a bug house piece. You just put it there for no reason.
Right.
It does not look like it got there by normal means, but I assure you folks, this was a chess game. But let's see how this happened, because they had this position out of the opening. You know, it looked like it's a Con Sicilian, and Parag WA likes these kind of double-edged games. They had this position. Adi played bishop to a3, guarding b2, threatening knight d6, and I thought this knight would be pretty good, but Parag WA simply ignores it, plays b5 to open up the position for his pieces, rook f5, bringing the rook in, knight d5, rook h5, queen h4, and I thought here that Mark was really on his road to checkmate. I wasn't sure he was going to get there right away, but this looks super dangerous. All the black pieces, look at this bishop pointing down, the knights are ready to come in, this rook might come here, this is a target, h2 might become a target. All of black's pieces look nice. White's pieces, I mean, this bishop on a3, can you really say that's a piece you'd want? I don't think so. And to me, this looked really unpleasant, but you can see how quickly everything can change. He took on d5, eliminating that piece. Queen back to c1. Mark played rook to g5, which seems logical, trying to target g2. But after bishop f3, you close down this a8 bishop. And that's an important thing, because if that bishop were to get in the game, it would be really dangerous. But here, somehow, he just wasn't able to bring anything into the party. He played d5, which is a move I really would rather not play, because now your bishop really gets blocked. But he wants to play knight e5. The problem is that after g3, he doesn't really have much to do. Note how you're not attacking this queen just yet because of the pin. However, you're just probably going to just give a nice safe square for your bishop. And it's hard to mate someone when they have a bishop on g2. It's just a really nice defensive piece. Mark plays knight e5, bishop d2, queen h5. Now note how the queen's attacked because the bishop blocks this rook here. And now he plays bishop e7, saying, hello, rook. Probably didn't know that rook could be attacked. And now he has to make a decision. Do I save that rook or do I not save that rook? Mark's an aggressive player. I'll give you a choice. Did he save that rook, or what do you think, Ben?
Nope. I don't know.
He played d4. He's like, have my rook, please. I beg of you.
Well, the rook's not doing a lot right now, seemingly, right?
That's true. It's like, you know, losing a rook is not bad if the rook is useless. I like this rule.
Right.
Don't bother about defending your pieces, guys. Just defend the pieces that are doing something. I'm joking, of course, but d4 has a nasty little trick. If you play queen takes g5, I play knight f3 check. Your queen's attacked. If king h1, of course, queen takes h2 mate. I'm not going to bother taking your queen. So bishop would have to take. Queen takes f3. This bishop on a8, which I said was dead a move ago, not so dead now. Queen g2 and queen h1 are both mate threats. I would say this position is resignable because there's no way to block this bishop or sacrifice for it or anything like that. So this position looks dead. I'm sure he won't be doing that. And after d4, he's having a think. So we have to decide, like, what's he going to do? How is he going to deal with this threat? And it could be bishop g5, bishop e7 was a little careless. Maybe he missed this opportunity. I'm not exactly sure. But let's see, because you're not obligated to take the rook by any means. One move that might have to be looked at is the simple capture, knight takes d4. So the idea of this is that now knight f3 is covered. You can eliminate the bishop on g2. You can play a move like bishop takes g2. And I might even think about queen takes g5, but also even after king takes bishop, I'm not quite seeing what Mark's plan would be. It seems like with f3 covered, it's just limited what you can do. You could try knight g4, threatening to h2. I might even be able to grab this rook because I do have an escape square on f3, but even if I have to play h3, it just looks like your pieces are in a tangle. They're not really doing too much. So, and indeed, he did play knight takes d4, as we can see. And I'm really curious what Mark's going to come up with. He's a resourceful guy, but it just looks like a difficult position to me. He just doesn't quite have enough for all this. And as often happens when you put your pieces end up on awkward squares, queen on h5, rook on g5, it's hard to orchestrate them in an attack. So I'll keep an eye on this. We'll see what happens. But my guess would be that Mark is actually going to lose and Adi Patel is going to move up and recover nicely from his loss last night. There are definitely some other games we can look at. I'm very interested to see what happened in this game between Hamrakulov and Vorontsov, two other guys who definitely I want to keep an eye on. I believe both of them go to Texas Tech in Lubbock, if I'm not mistaken. And let's see. So they're teammates? Is that correct? I think Vorontsov for sure is.
As we double check here.
No, Hamrakulov maybe not yet.
Yeah, I didn't think
yeah.
Hamrakulov is.
Okay, yep, that was my mistake. But yeah, Vorontsov, Texas Tech, student in Lubbock. And let's see what happened, because this game, there was a very confusing moment to me. It was this moment in the opening. Looks like a relatively normal position. It's kind of a King's Indian structure. Black's going to play knight g7, eventually try to play for f5. White usually plays on the queen side with moves like a4, b4, bringing the knight in, rook b1. This is at least how I know how to play this position. But Hamrakulov had other ideas. And I saw this move, I had to adjust my glasses for a moment because I wasn't quite sure this was actually the move played. The idea is very simple. He wants to control f5. But honestly, to me, this looked a little dangerous. And after knight f6, h3, h5, it seemed like his king side just got opened up. And I was not a fan. So knight h2, king g7, bringing a rook to the h-file. And quite honestly, I feel like this whole thing backfired. He played c4 just to make sure the pawn center is secure, but really, this looked quite unpleasant. He brings the knight in. Notice how Black's just maneuvering all his pieces in, threatening bishop to g5. And now came a very interesting moment. Obviously, Black could play a move like queen h8, but okay, I'm not so sure he has anything concrete planned. Obviously, rook takes knight is a powerful move, but even after something like rook h3, maybe it's not so simple to break through. Note how f3 is covered by the queen. This is rather important. Rook takes h2 doesn't do much. Maybe he could just keep building. Queen h7, rook h8. It looks like a pretty tough situation, to be honest. But Black chose to actually just take this knight immediately. Quite an interesting sacrifice. The idea is that queen h8 check, king g1, queen h4, and now this knight does not have a happy square. And what happens to knights when they don't have a happy square? They have to find an unhappy square.
Right.
That square would be knight h1. And quite a move, but it does hold on temporarily. He takes on e1, and this is the trick, because if you play rook h8, bishop g2, that knight on h1 may look silly, but it actually guards a couple crucial squares. And maybe not so simple, but Pavlov finds a nice tactic. Queen takes e1, nice little shot. The idea being after queen takes e1, knight takes f3 check, grab the queen, and black simply finds himself up a pawn, and I think better positionally. So I would say this game, black is headed towards victory. He checks and attacks, does the double attack. Bishop c8, hitting that g-pawn. Bishop d7. Next, he's going to bring his rook in. Sure enough, rook h8. And in the current position, he played b4. Understandable, white's just trying to make the game complicated, so at least black doesn't just win immediately. But quite honestly, this looks just painful. At the moment, this bishop doesn't have any great discoveries. If it moves, keep in mind, you hit this bishop on h3. But honestly, you don't necessarily need anything great in a position like this. It wouldn't surprise me if he even just takes this b-pawn, and after bishop takes b6, simply moves the bishop, and asking, what are you going to do with this guy? Maybe knight f2 kind of holds on. I'm tempted to sack on h3, but maybe not working. So I don't know. Maybe this is actually not the cleanest way. I'm sure he'll find something nice, though. I mean, it's just pretty ugly position. Even a move like bishop g5 is probably not ridiculous. The idea being after taking the bishop, you take here, and these pawns are just too weak. There's just no way to guard everything. And really, it's just a matter of technique at this point. So he does actually take on b4. So I'll be interested to see what happens. After bishop takes pawn, I'm sure there has to be something. It's just, this is just too flimsy, knight on h1. Usually when pieces are this ugly, there's something good tactically. Tactics will tend to work in your favor. Maybe his idea here is simply bishop e1, I don't know. The idea being that now you cover the square for the knight, so there's no knight to f2. And again, if rook takes bishop, rook takes h3, this g-pawn is just a gunner. I don't know, again, if this is the cleanest way, but it certainly looks very strong. And again, could have something much simpler here. You know, it just looks like a pretty bad position. So we'll keep an eye on this, but I have a feeling that Vorontsov is going to reel in the point here.
It certainly looks like it, Josh, and in the International Master Norm section, Jobava has clinched a victory against Luis Torres.
Yeah, it looked like a blunder from Torres. So they reached this position. And again, it looks like white's doing okay. He doubles up. Black has the two bishops, but quite honestly, the bishops don't make a very powerful impression. This pawn on e4 looks like a nice pawn, but it blocks off all black's pieces. And Torres simply gangs up on this d-pawn, takes it. However, Banawa had a very sneaky idea here. Rather than take with the bishop, which of course looks very logical, rook takes, and I don't know. I mean, at the moment this rook is pinned, but at the same time it should be fairly easy to get out of the pin eventually. Instead, he actually opts to take with the rook. And now after rook takes, he simply plays the waiting move f6. Looks like a ridiculous move, but it does two things. First of all, it kills this bishop. Not like that's necessarily crucial, but it always is nice. And the idea is that now if white plays f4, you do not have to take this rook on d5 like this, after which white could even just play queen takes and is probably doing more than okay here. The bishop comes to d4. I like white's position, actually. But instead, he plays queen f7, and there's just not a lot going on. So, and in fact, this is what happened, queen f7, and now the problem is this rook just cannot move. And after rook 1 d2, black plays rook d8, and he actually just resigns. Note, by the way, how if he had taken with the bishop, he might be able to take this rook followed by taking this rook. There would be a rook on e8 here, rather than a bishop on b7. So it's one of those rare cases you'd actually rather have the bishop, because now after rook takes rook, queen takes queen, you're simply down two rooks for a queen and a bishop, and it's simply too much. The e-pawn is weak. The rooks are not doing anything super special. The queen, it's just a matter of the time till the queen cleans everything up. So quite a tactical blunder by Luis Torres, and what I thought was just a fairly normal game. I'm not sure if he was better or not, but it looked like just very normal. But as you can see, you got to pay attention from the very start, because one questionable move and things can go very poorly for you very fast.
And another result in the Grandmaster norm section, Akshat Chandra with the black pieces has defeated Denis Borosh.
All right, let's take a look at this one. This game I didn't have as close an eye on. However, let's see what happened. Oh, the final position, he resigned before black could play the tactic. It looks like black's almost mated here. For example, if the knight moves somewhere random, let's even say if knight e7, you get mated. Very embarrassing. And if knight e5 check, he had the really nice idea of knight takes, and it looks like, uh-oh, your rook hangs, but now you give a check, take it back, c6 is hanging. So it's like everything's good, right? However, he resigned, and in fact, he did wait for the move. He resigned because black has rook takes knight. And now the tactic works against you.
Right.
If rook takes rook, fork the king and queen, or king and rook, whichever one you prefer. And there's no check on h8, notice, because the knight covers. Very important. So yeah, this position, of course, it was hopeless anyway. I'm sure that Danish saw the move, but after f5, there's not much you can do here. You're just down too much material with your pieces pinned. That's usually a sign of bad things to come. So quite a tough loss for Danish. But Akshat Chandra, who was struggling for the beginning part of the tournament, starting to move up. And we're seeing that in other sections as well, I think. That the guys at the bottom are not planning on staying at the bottom, and they're getting some nice wins. So
oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to watch these games as they're happening, if you're not there already, check out uschesschamps.com. There's a really cool feature where this video is actually embedded in the upper right corner of our Chess 24 module. So it's uschesschamps.com. It's the best way to watch chess. Check it out if you're not there already.
Indeed. So I figured I would move, unless there's another result, which I'm not catching. We're trying to keep an eye on all the results, but sometimes there's 10 games going, so sometimes we might forget about one for the moment, but I assure you it's not going to be a permanent thing.
There's 3 games over right now in both sections.
All right, and we've covered those?
Yeah.
So I'm going to move to the game between Sergei Motsenko and Aaron Garbinski. Garbinski, as white, is actually up a queen for a rook and 2 pawns. So what Motsenko is hoping for is that he can hold a fortress here. Basically what that means is keep it so that, obviously he's not trying to win anything, but if he can keep white at bay, keep it so the queen and king cannot penetrate the black position, sometimes you can actually draw. With this much material, I kind of have my doubts. I have a feeling that if white knows what they're doing here, they'll be able to break this down. But you never know. These positions are very tricky, and sometimes when you least expect it, there are ways to win. But I suspect this is a win. White can probably play something like, he played king e2 in the game. I thought king g2 maybe, but maybe it doesn't matter that much. And the idea is that this g-pawn is actually quite weak. So if you're not careful, I'm just going to play queen d2, queen g5, something like this. And if you try to push your b-pawn, I simply check, go behind, and then snack on it. And I think that that's going to be probably enough. It's just too much material for there really to be a fortress here. That's the general rule. If there's not that much left on the board, fortresses are possible. As it is, I'd say it's very unlikely, but again, you never know. Sometimes there are interesting possibilities. But let's see how this happened, because you're asking how did the top seed, rated 2560, higher than anyone in the GM Norm section, get such a lost position?
Right.
Let us see. So this position actually was, it started off way before this, actually. In this position, I thought that black was just doing okay, or I thought black would trade off pieces on the c file, likely a draw, but as you can see, white's pieces are kind of swarming around the black king here, and if you give him too many moves, guess what? You might end up checkmated. So black played queen d8, knight g4, and here black tried the shot knight takes h4. My guess is this is not a winning attempt, simply because it looks super dangerous. I thought that black might try rook takes c1, but it could be that already there are moves like shots like knight takes h6 check in the air. The idea being that after pawn takes, queen takes, you're threatening queen g7 mate, and if you block that with queen f8, you allow knight to f6 with mate. And that's not fun. Well, it is for white. In any case, he played knight takes h4 check, which looks like such a clever shot, The problem is that because you sacked a piece, white says, all right, now it's my turn. Knight f6 check. Pawn takes. Knight takes f6 check. And again, I mean, there are lots of possibilities here. I thought knight takes h6 check was possible, with the idea that if pawn takes, queen takes, you're threatening lots of mates again. However, maybe it's just his king just doesn't have any shelter here, so black can keep giving checks. And that's usually the problem, that black's just trying for a perpetual here. So white chose this one. Rook takes c7 and rook e3. This was actually a really interesting moment. I thought at first that white would play rook h1 and that the game was essentially over. The reason being that after queen g5 check, I thought you'd trade and have mate. But because you've moved this pawn after rook check, notice how if king e7, rook e8 is checkmate, very common checkmating pattern. But after king g7, the king has a little bit of breathing room. And that's all you need. You can still give a perpetual, something like this. Going here would not be recommended due to mate. But you go back and there's just somehow no mate. And notice after rook h8, king here, you can grab this rook, but it's not quite winning because you can take this rook on h8. So there's just no way to do it. Honestly, it looks like a really good position for white. Even if you play a move like rook b8, rook d8, even though black's up a pawn, it looks much more pleasant for the white pieces. That being said, doesn't mean that it's that clear or that easy. Even after rook b8, threatening this and this, for example, you can play rook b7. However, Aaron found something which was quite interesting. He played rook e3, which has a beautiful trick to it. If queen g5 check, which looks like a strong move because now you pin the rook to the queen, white says, all right, fine. Enjoy. And the problem now is that after queen takes queen, rook g8 check, and that is mate. And notice how even if the king could move to g7, rook g8 is mate because there's a pawn on h6. So it kind of hurts you. So his idea was simply to play rook g3 and go for this kind of mate. Black played king e7 and h5. The idea being, white wasn't just threatening rook g8. Let's say you play a move like bishop b7. Rook g4, oops, that queen is trapped. You would have to sacrifice your bishop like this, which is actually an interesting try, because now, if king takes bishop, you can play even, oh no, rook c1 check doesn't work, because I can take you, and if you try to skewer me, I can block. But you can play queen h1, queen h3, but honestly, you're down a piece. I don't think it's going to work out too well for you. So in the game, he played h5 to cover this rook g4 move. And again, I thought that white should have something really punishing here. It just looked like one of those positions. You have to be careful. If you try to trap the queen with rook h3, bishop f1 check is a nasty shot, and you actually lose. So don't avoid that. Don't play into that, boys and girls. However, there was nothing that really jumped out at me. I really wanted to get the queen to this diagonal. So I was trying to find ways to do it. I was looking at b4. I was looking at other things. But after b4, okay, if black takes, you look like a genius. Go me. However, black maybe could try a move like rook c4 with the idea of taking on d4. And again, my feeling was that this should probably work, but I just couldn't do it. And again, for these players, it's much harder than for me. I'm just sitting here making moves. If I make a mistake, it's not a big deal. I just embarrass myself. Happens all the time. But for these players, it's really difficult because they make one little slip and a lot of their work goes down the drain. In any case, even after queen takes d4 here, maybe rook takes d4, maybe it's not super simple. But I thought this b4 idea was kind of what I was focused on. He played queen h6, which actually is a beautiful trick. For example, if you play queen takes d4 thinking nothing's happening, I understand rook e8 looks dangerous, and actually rook e8 maybe does the job here. I should have found a more threatening move. But the cool thing is, rook g8 is not as forcing. You allow queen takes e5, but you have the beautiful shot, queen f8 check. Must take the queen, and now you mate. So queen h6 was a very sneaky move, threatening queen f8. Black could defend in a couple ways. Bishop b5 covering this square would do it, so you can't mate there. He chose rook c8, but now Aaron reveals his second idea, rook g4.
Nice.
And the whole idea is that this pawn is now pinned. So black has to take with the queen in order not to lose even more material. Takes, and I thought that here, I really thought that Aaron would have cleaned up this position, not easily, but I thought this should be a win. He surprised me here by playing queen d2. I thought for sure he would just take this pawn. And maybe I'm missing something, but I thought that this was relatively clean. For example, if you try rook to c2, white threatening this pawn, kind of getting counterplay seemingly, you can play queen f3. The king moves back, because otherwise if you lose this, you're dead. And now queen b3 hitting the rook and hitting this pawn. So I thought this was pretty good. Maybe he was worried about something like bishop coming here and then trying to sneak back here and maybe trying to hold. Honestly, I have a hard time believing it's holdable. There's this weakness to work on. The king can run into f6 at some point. I'd say it's a pretty difficult position for black to really think about holding, but there are always chances. And now let's fast forward to the game. At some point, he did get this position, which to my eyes looks pretty good. He doesn't really want the g4 pawn for some reason. But he gets this. He goes after these pawns. And yeah, I mean, at this point, it looks like he should be winning fairly comfortably. He plays b4, a5. So this is how he wins this bishop. Honestly, I feel like he could even take the time to take this pawn, and this might even be simpler, and then just go back and push, and it looks pretty hopeless. But he chose a5, a6, got to sack the bishop. And now you come to this position where he's trying to get the fortress. And again, it's always a little nerve-wracking because during a game you never really know if it's a fortress. And if you stumble into a fortress accidentally, it can be the worst feeling in the world because you did all this work, you got the material, you got a winning position against such a strong player. But
now, Josh, for those who may not know, what exactly is a fortress in chess
So
terms?
a fortress is basically a position that is impenetrable. You might be down material, a rook for a queen, you know, whatever the material might be. But if you have it so that every weakness is covered and your opponent cannot make any progress, their king can't move forward, they can't start attacking too much with their queen, basically it means you have everything covered so that even though you can't do anything, they cannot make progress, is what a fortress is. They happen in endgames. One of the simplest examples would be if you have a king and your opponent has a bishop and a rook pawn and their bishop is not the same color as your queening square. If you get your king to that queening square, it's a draw. And the reason why is it's a fortress. There's just no way for white to try to win without stalemating you. It's one of the really embarrassing ones.
You can't force the king out of the corner, right?
No way to force the king out of the corner, and if you try, you'll just end up stalemating the king. So while your opponent can donate the game to you, with best play, it is most certainly a draw. So let's go to the starting position, and let's see if we can figure out whether this is a fortress. So again, his idea would be he has this, and it looks like white's king can't get in, everything's covered, right? The problem with such fortresses usually is that they're a little too delicate. Note how this g4 pawn is not defended. I'm sure Aaron were wishing he took that pawn earlier in the game at one of his chances, but at the same time, I'm not so sure exactly how it works. But okay, let's see what could happen here. I think that white should try to activate the queen. If you have a passive queen, there's no way you're going to try to really be able to win this game. So I thought he might try something like queen a3 check, king up, and then try to bring the queen in somehow. So for example, a move like queen e7 would be fairly logical, trying to shoot for here. Again, it's important that after b2, you can always slide back and collect this pawn. You have to be careful of tactics, of course. For example, after g3, you have to make sure that nothing horrible happens to you. Notice if the rook were here, you could actually have a problem because rook check and winning stuff. But here you can indeed take this pawn, and after rook check, king f2. And this is a position where black can try to set up a fortress by doing something like this. I realize, guys, this is way far from the game, but just to show you kind of how it works. In this position, if black can say, I'm going to just sit and you can't break through, this is a fortress. The problem is you can run your opponent out of moves. For example, you play queen b8, or, well, black has to make a move first. Say king g6, queen b8. So now black doesn't want to let you in. You say, okay, I'll pass. And the problem you have here is that you always need to make a move. So in order to establish a fortress, you don't just need a position where you have where you have a position where your opponent can't break through. You actually need two. You need two positions because if you only have one position, it means that your opponent can run you out of moves. In chess, you always have to make a move. If that weren't the case, black could just sit here and kind of relax, chill out with a beer, say you're never getting in. But not how chess works. It doesn't look that simple, but the idea is that if the king moves somewhere, you can play, say, queen h8, and you just run your opponent out of moves. Here there are checks, there are things like this. So I don't think it's actually that simple to just break down all these fortresses, but quite honestly, I don't think that it's going to work. For example, if you keep checking, most likely the king should actually come around this way. Note how the nice thing is when your opponent's playing for a fortress, you have all the time in the world. And the problem is when the king gets to e7, let me just show you how to break a fortress essentially. So let's say black just kind of sits here. There's not much black can really do, to be honest. But okay, let's see.
I mean, if you can break a fortress, is it really a fortress at all?
Oh, wow. We're getting philosophical here, guys. I'd watch out. I'd watch out. Then I would say it's a failed fortress.
Ah, okay.
But yes. Very good point. Yeah, but okay, if your king gets cut off, it's going to be very easy. You simply run your king, keep in mind all the time in the world, and then you take this pawn. That fortress is kaput. So you might even be able to run the king out of moves, but of course it's unnecessary. The point being that I doubt that this is a fortress. So king goes to g7, and here white has to decide how to force this though, because black does not have to play b2. After a move like queen e7, for example, he didn't play this. He played king d2. So his idea actually is to cover the b pawn with the king and slide the queen over to take care of other business. But I'm not so sure. Black plays rook f3 here. And again, he needs a move. Probably the king would have to move back, I would imagine. Maybe his idea is just to play queen e7 and part with this pawn. But somehow this doesn't look like the most solid way to do things. You play king g6, note how you cover this square. There's queen h4, but now you allow rook f4. This does not look like a good way to do things. Note how this pawn is still there, you know. I mean, it's probably not going to create a queen, but in any case, after king d2, he's still thinking. But I would imagine that rook f3 is coming. And again, I'm just not quite sure what his plan is and how he's going to break this down at the moment. I would say that he needs to get the queen in, run the king out of moves. It looks like it shouldn't quite hold, but at the same time, you still need to prove it. And he has to do that. So it's kind of it's one of those tricky situations where you have to be a little bit careful. Not saying this is a fortress, but it's a position where, you know, things can go wrong. You cannot win this position. So sometimes earlier in the game, when you have a chance to take those little pawns, if you're not in a rush and you take those pawns and then try to win, sometimes it's just easier. Not that this isn't a win, but it's a little bit easier. Sure enough, he did play rook f3. And again, this is one of the marks of a strong player.
Hey, Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt,
no
but Adi Patel has clinched a victory. Just wanted to let everybody know in the GM Norm field. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to Adi a little bit later on. That would be good, and an important win for him. But yeah, as I was just saying about the fortress, sometimes you take those little pawns, take your time. It can be a little bit easier, but we're seeing Motsenko, one of the reasons why he is one of the strongest players. Players like this are hard to close out because they never quite give up. They're always coming up with resources. So the idea of sacking the bishop was kind of forced, but at the same time, he found a way to at least make life difficult. So I'm still looking for Garbinski to come away with the win, but let's see how Mark lost. I did think his position was quite bad, but let's see. So a lot happened since we were last there. This is what happens in this time control, guys. You think you have plenty of time to go over stuff, but then life comes at you fast, Ben. So knight takes d4, takes g2, rook f5, and Adi says, you know what, I'm just going to take that. It's possible to leave the rook there, and quite honestly, that also looks winning. But he decides just to take, and it seems like nothing's going to happen. He could have thrown in a check on f3 here, maybe taken on f5 after that. Probably doesn't make a huge difference. The knight and queen look nice together, but they're not necessarily doing too much. White plays queen f4, putting an end to those thoughts. He grabs b2. Sometimes even sacrificing an important pawn like a b2 pawn is worth it if you can just trade off those queens, simplify the game. So he plays a3, bishop c5, rook e1, and there's just not much you can do here. He forks, but bishop simply drops back, very safe. Rook d3. Note how he's taking his time. He's not in a rush. He's making sure everything's covered. Rook comes over. So the idea is now if you try to grab this pawn, I'm guessing that the rook just comes into the 7th. And indeed, he plays rook d8. So this bishop on f8 now is in pretty dire straits. And Mark just couldn't find a way to save it. He played king f7, rook b7 check, and he gave up the ghost. Because if bishop e7 here, you play this, the pin is too strong. So nice win for Adi, and Mark
goes down to 3 out of 5. So he's having a bit of a rough event now. I wouldn't say he's doing horribly, but considering he was in the clear lead and looking pretty good, things have gone pretty rough for him since. That being said, of course, still a few rounds to go. I would not write him off, but definitely a tough blow and a nice win for Adi Patel, who's in the plus column, I believe.
Yes, and furthermore, in the International Master Norm section, 14-year-old Josiah Stearman has increased the bad tournament that Brandon Jacobson is having. Brandon has 1 win so far, but that game has since ended as well.
Yep. And this game, actually, there was a really crucial moment because I think that Brandon had maybe a winning position. It was earlier in the game. Queen g4 happened, queen takes e5. And at this point, I thought that Josiah had played a little recklessly, and I didn't see what he would do after a move like bishop c4. Pinning the knight to the rook, and the idea is that if you defend the knight and I play rook e8, I'm just going to take your queen, or if you move, I'm going to take your knight. That's a whole piece. So after bishop c4, he'd most likely move his knight somewhere. I don't know where exactly, let's say g3. But that's an exchange, and quite honestly, if the rook gets to the 7th and you're up the exchange, you're probably winning. So I would suspect that Brandon was actually winning. He played f6, which looked maybe okay. You're going to play bishop c4 next. But Josiah found the nice intermezzo, in-between move, h3. Hitting that queen. And after takes, it's still maybe not bad for black. However, he ended up losing this e-pawn. And then white has this very nice pawn chain on the king side. His rook's going to come in here. Still looks like an unclear position, but from this point on, it seems like Brandon just got outplayed. And sometimes this happens. When you're having a rough event, things can still go your way, but it seems like everything just goes against you. You have a good position, you somehow lose it, and I know this feeling really well. But some events just, it seems like nothing goes your way. He had a nice win last round, but yeah, h5 I think is a really bad idea. In this position, maybe he's not doing so badly. It still looks rough. He's going to take this b-pawn and come in. Notice how the king is black's main problem here, more than the pawns. But he maybe would have holding chances if he had kind of bunkered down. It already looks bad. But h5 is just desperation, and after g5, his life is just really terrible. These pawns are way too strong. And he sacrifices a piece to get out, but once you sack a piece, you're pretty much dead. And the game lasted a while. Oh, this is kind of nice.
What happened?
Well, his knight got trapped somehow. I don't know why he put his knight on h4, but he gets out of it with rook h8 and wins the rook back. Maybe unnecessary, but a nice little tactical flourish. A lot of the time, technique actually does include lots of tactics. So just because you're up a piece doesn't mean you stop looking. And here, he tries to play for mate, but he might get mated himself. And eventually, there are lots of maneuvering, lots of dancing, lots of shaking. But eventually, he did get things done. Definitely some time pressure here, because these are not the most accurate of moves. But he finally pins the king to the back rank, usually a good start. Brings his king in, and yeah, this is just over. Surprised he has to do this, but it's the way it goes. Once he wins the pawn, he just organizes his pieces, and this was pretty much the end. They played it out. I'm guessing because, again, there wasn't much time. Definitely not the smoothest of technique, but at the same time, and then a nice little flourish. Again, not necessary by any means. You could just defend this knight, but king here with the threat of mate. So he got a win. Any other results that you want to bring up? I do see that Josh Kolos won as well as black.
Yeah, we haven't taken a look at that game yet today, I believe.
No, we haven't. And this was, it looked like Josh just kind of had the upper hand most of the way. He got to this endgame, and he's just up a pawn, opposite bishop endgame. White has some activity, but quite honestly, it's a pretty nice pawn. She has this knight on e6, Chiyu does, which is not a bad piece, but it also doesn't attack too much. And eventually, he trades it off. And again, opposite bishop endgame is always some chances, but I would say it's kind of rough, especially with this weak e3 pawn. Definitely looks like some drawing chances here, but eventually she was outplayed, and he was able to break through. She actually took this pawn on e6, but now this e3 pawn is hanging, and this is a problem, because if you take, I play rook takes, those rooks are rather menacing. And and not a lot you can do. For example, if rook f1, I check and pin your rook. And if you go king d1, I check and take this rook just off your hands entirely. So the problem is she won back the pawn, but there were lots of dynamics. But even here, I mean, she won back her pawn, but this is eventually going to come. This pawn is a bit weak. Bishop a4 was maybe kind of rough, but at the same time, still a tough position. So even though she won back her pawn, her misery did not quite end. And eventually Josh was able to reel in the point. As we're seeing, lots of moves. Keep in mind, these guys probably have almost no time. So the likelihood that these are all accurate moves is unlikely. But this pawn is likely to win a bishop. This pawn, note how the bishop is not the same color, or rather is the same color as this square. Very important. May not matter too much in the end, but should be good enough. Using tactics in his favor, if rook takes pawn, there's rook check. Take the bishop, and if you try to attack the rook, I can simply move back. No, and should be easily winning. Always tactics and technique, but here he simply uses the king to win the bishop, and this is a very simple position. You simply outmaneuver this king. Eventually you come back. For example, if this, you'll go here. There's no way to trade off these pawns, and the king will simply outmaneuver you using the bishop as it helpful. King comes in. This would be the end. So after king g2, Chiyu decided to call it a day. So tough loss for her. She's having a rough event. I think only 2 draws so far, but she is outrated by almost everyone. And Josh Kolis, I think, at +2 now, I want to say. So he is moving up. Let us see.
Indeed, Josh Kolis at +2. Josh Kolis, a 19-year-old, now resides in St. Louis, one of the hometown guys.
Wow.
Stuff.
So yeah, so definitely the locals will be cheering for him. I do see that we have another result, a couple actually. Pavlo Vorontsov did beat Hamrakulov, so as predicted. Looks like kind of a painful position. Last we saw it was this position, and it looked like black was winning. He chose to do it this way, attacking the c-pawn, and there's just no good way to guard this guy. If you play rook c1, you give up the a-pawn. This is what happens when all your pawns are weak. So he gave up the g-pawn, but not a very difficult technical task. He decided to trade everything, which is not the most aesthetic way to do it, but at the same time, this is the way professionals have to do things. And this is a very simple win, just way too much. And the b1 bishop is going to fall now because you have to move the rook away. So that was that. And there was another game. There was a draw between our leader, Stavrula Solakidou, against Daniel Gurevich. I thought Gurevich was going to win this game. So I'm very curious how she managed to save it. Got to a queen endgame. My goodness. Wow. Again, this happens when the players just don't have that much time. But I thought that Gurevich was well on his way to victory. Last I saw was around here. And Gurevich is up a pawn. It's this e-pawn, which doesn't look super strong. However, there's this nice pin, and there's this weak pawn on h3. So he simply goes after it. I thought she would just give up this pawn, maybe take here, play here, and maybe try to do something with the king. Like, I guess king f2 runs into rook h2. Probably this is a rough go of it, but I don't know. Maybe she could try rook a2 to a6. It looks bad. She tried rook h2, which is not the prettiest move on the planet, but at the same time, it holds the h-pawn. But she did find a nice resource here with e5, and this makes life a little bit more complicated. Maybe Daniel should have taken an extra move to play king d6 just to prevent this e5 resource. I'm not sure, but he did allow it, and after this, somehow she got enough counterplay. He plays back to d6. The idea is if king here, you run into this. So he plays king d6, takes king d5. The idea now, of course, and just because it's an endgame, as I mentioned, doesn't mean there aren't some tactics. Now the idea is if f4, rook takes h3 check. So, and this actually happens. King c4, takes on e5. But this is a lot of liquidation, and somehow Daniel was just not able to win this game. She brings the king back to b2. Rook g3, and now they actually trade to a king and pawn, a queen endgame. My guess would be that after rook check, or rook h3, if trying to check here, you play rook check, rook here, attacking this guy, rook here, and it's hard to win a rook endgame, let me tell you. This is pretty liquidated. So my guess would be allowing that e5 shot was not so good, but very resourceful by her in a position where it looked like things were bad. They trade to a queen endgame. The general rule for queen endgames is that if the king is in front, like it is here, it's usually very difficult to win because the king just can't find shelter, and it's hard to trade queens when your opponent's king is in front.
In front of the
in front of this pawn, yes.
Okay.
If your king can't be in front, here's the rule: you want to actually be as far away as possible, because then there are fewer checks, believe it or not, that get in your way. The worst place to be is somewhere like here or here, because then there are all sorts of blocking checks which trade queens. But the best place to be is in front, and that's where she found herself. So she started checking. Notice how there are also stalemate tricks. You know, for example, if the queen were to be given away here, it would be stalemate, so also something to look for. But she simply gives too many checks, and there's just no way to get out of them. Notice how, for example, even a queen trade here with the king back on b1 would be a draw. You do not come up, allowing this, which would lose. You simply go to c1, and this king has no good moves. If it comes up here, you go here. King b4, king d2, simply going for the opposition. So he played king c3, she gave checks. They finally traded, but she was careful. She played here, king c4, and now king here, getting the opposition. And they played it out, because why not? Always fun to play it out. I'm sure they did it quickly. I like when people play it out real fast. Like if it's really long, then it gets ridiculous. But just to show the fans, look, I didn't stop trying. It really is a draw, I swear. So Stavrula will at least maintain a tie for the lead here by this draw. However, she might be joined by Tata Abrahamian.
I'd like to look at that game after our break here.
All right.
We're going to take a moment off the air, and then we'll be right back with you for the rest of today's round 6 for the St. Louis Norm Congress. You're watching it on USChessChamps.com. We'll see you in just a moment.
Don't go.
A question on Twitter from Damas. I should not have pronounced that. That was a bit of a trap, yeah?
For those of you who are new to chess, it might look like ba3 is an illegal move here because white advances pawn 2 squares, not 1. But it's a little something we call en passant. And you can do that, but you have to do it instantly. You can't wait for a move, like let's say play king e7, king g2, and now try, because should I do it?
I'm sorry. This is too funny for words.
This is a software glitch? I'm pretty sure there's not allowed.
Lawrence. Hello, Lawrence. Yeah, I'll play 4 against Lawrence. And now he's going to play something against me which we discussed at length during the course of my stay. Yeah, he told me this is excellent. d5, this was what I was kind of hoping for, because now I think e5 is quite strong. No, Lawrence, this is not how chess works. Sadly, it would be much, much more fun if chess actually worked like this. But I don't think it does. Or maybe it does. Well, that's me regretting what I just said. How did I get from there to here is a little bit beyond me. And what's worse, I will never hear the end of it. My quality of life has just gone downhill tremendously because I'm actually sharing the office with the guy.
You could fly to Venice or Paris or even Copenhagen. You could fly all over the world. But why? When you could just come to St. Louis. Your trip begins at ExploreSt.Louis.com.
A moment comes in chess when you need to test yourself at a different level. Chess 24 Premium offers the tools that you need to reach your maximum potential. From hundreds of interactive video lessons to becoming part of the Chess 24 community. You can analyze with friends or coach your students live. You get 24/7 coverage of chess news and events, access to premium analysis and commentary, and the chance to interact with grandmasters and other top players and coaches. Get advice from the best and even challenge them to a battle. Be the best chess player you can be. It's time to level up your game with Chess 24 Premium membership.
Be surprised. Be intrigued. Be delighted. The World Chess Hall of Fame in St. Louis is nothing you'd expect and everything you love. 3 galleries highlight the history, culture, and creativity behind the game. Explore chess in ways you never imagined. It's a one-of-a-kind cultural institution where rare artifacts and world-class art play together. The World Chess Hall of Fame. Mind, art, experience.
There's a weekend vacation, a one-tank trip in a nearby city you won't want to skip. St. Louis is the stop for non-stop fun. So much fun for your family, infinity plus a ton. There's museums full of art and super fun slides. Upside-down concretes, twisty, turny rides. Houses full of magic, some with butterflies. Gardens growing flowers, parks with giant eyes. St. Louis is the stop for non-stop fun. So much fun for your family, infinity plus a ton.
You could fly to Venice or Paris or even Copenhagen. You could fly all over the world. But why? When you could just come to St. Louis. Your trip begins at ExploreSt.Louis.com.
A moment comes in chess when you need to test yourself at a different level. Chess 24 Premium offers the tools that you need to reach your maximum potential. From hundreds of interactive video lessons to becoming part of the Chess 24 community. You can analyze with friends or coach your students live. You get 24/7 coverage of chess news and events, access to premium analysis and commentary, and the chance to interact with grandmasters and other top players and coaches. Get advice from the best and even challenge them to a battle. Be the best chess player you can be. It's time to level up your game with Chess 24 Premium membership.
You could fly to Venice or Paris or even Copenhagen. You could fly all over the world. But why? When you could just come to St. Louis. Your trip begins at ExploreStLouis.com.
A question on Twitter from Damas. I should not have pronounced that. That was a bit of a trap, yeah?
For those of you who are new to chess, it might look like ba3 is an illegal move here because white advances pawn 2 squares, not 1. But it's a little something we call en passant. And you can do that, but you have to do it instantly. You can't wait for a move, like let's say play king e7, king g2, and now try, because could I do it?
I'm sorry. This is too funny for words.
This is a software glitch? I'm pretty sure there's not allowed.
Lawrence. Hello, Lawrence. Yeah, I'll play 4 against Lawrence. And now he's going to play something against me which we discussed at length during the course of my stay. Yeah, he told me this is excellent. d5, this was what I was kind of hoping for, because now I think e5 is quite strong. No, Lawrence, this is not how chess works. Sadly, it would be much, much more fun if chess actually worked like this. But I don't think it does. Or maybe it does. Well, that's me regretting what I just said. How did I get from there to here is a little bit beyond me. And what's worse, I will never hear the end of it. My quality of life has just gone downhill tremendously because I'm actually sharing the office with the guy.
Hello and welcome back to the St. Louis Chess Club for the 2018 Norm Congress. My name is Ben Simon, and as always, with the man with the hat, Grandmaster Josh Friedel, we are in the midst of round number 6, which started several hours ago and is wrapping up rapidly. And Josh, where are we right now so far in the tournament? And follow along, of course, on uschesschamps.com.
Well, in the GM section, we have the ones we covered already. Adi Patel beat Parag WA. Pavel Vorontsov as black beat Hamrakulov. Gurevich as black drew against the leader Stavrula Solokidou. And Akshat Chandra beat Dinesh Borosh. The only game still going was Tata Abrahamian as black against John Bartholomew. And it looks like Tatev is going to catch Stavrula. And in fact already has. She beat John Bartholomew as black. We see the end of the game here is this position. And it was quite a game because there were lots of it played at the end. But it looked like Tatev had the upper hand, got to this rook endgame up 2 pawns. And from here on it was fairly simple conversion, but I can tell you, Ben, that when you have no time, no conversion is super simple. And after this, it looked like things were over. I thought that he might resign here, but he decides to soldier on. And there's one trick in all of these positions, and she actually fell for it. She played, I don't want to say fell for it because it's not the end of the world. She played h2. And the trick, of course, is that it looks like it's just over. You can take this pawn. And the idea is that now if rook a2 check, you have king f3 and you're kind of embarrassed. Luckily, when you're 3 pawns to the good, it's not a big deal. And after a3, it's pretty much over. He tries one last trick. King f3 is a cool move because if you play a2, rook f2, all of a sudden, how do you win exactly? And I've seen this trick before because I almost had this in one of my games. If king e5, you give a check, go back. There's no rook move with check. You take, and then you can take this pawn. If the king tries to get too close, you start giving checks. Give checks. And this would be a heartbreaking way to not win up 3 pawns. However, Tatev, of course, did not fall for this. She tried rook f1 check, king g2, a2. And now there were no more stalemate tricks. John tried, but Tatev said, I insist you take my rook. And finally he gave it up because obviously this is going to be with check, so the game was over. So a few nice tricks by John at the end. You never can let your guard down, but Tatev came through with the victory. So it is her and Stavrula, the 2 ladies, tied for first place. Not only the 2 ladies, the 2 bottom seeds.
This is unbelievable.
It really is. And the tournament's not over yet. Anything can happen, but it shows you that these ratings do not mean everything. It means that's how consistent they are, that's how they perform over time. But if two players catch fire, some other players aren't playing so well, you never know what can happen.
Exactly.
So quite something. So that's all the games for the GM norm section. Hopefully we can get Tatev down here. But
yeah, hopefully. Hey, so the first section is all wrapped up. All 5 games have ended. Let's take a look at the standings after 6 rounds have been played in their top section.
So there they are, Tatev and Stavrula leading with 4 points out of 5. Quite an impressive score in this field. But they're not ahead by much. Pavlo Vorontsov, Adi Patel just trailing with 3.5. Parag WA, after a couple tough days, is down to 3, but still not performing badly, along with Hamrakulov and John Bartholomew. We see Daniel Gurevich still in last, but he did draw the leader with black and was pressing her. So keep in mind, just because the point spread is pretty big, the 1.5 was actually almost beating the 4. So you can't really rule it out by the pairings at any rate, but at the moment, the 2 bottom seeds are in fact leading.
Wouldn't it be amazing if they could hold on and sustain that lead?
It would be.
Something, I mean, I haven't seen something like that where the 2 bottom seeds finish at the top.
You see it once in a while, but usually in a round robin it's kind of rare. I don't think I've seen it just because, everyone plays everyone. It's not, but this is a compact field. The very top is not that far from the very bottom, so it's believable, but it's still pretty cool.
What else is going on that we haven't really taken a look at? We're going to get Tatev in here in just a moment.
Yeah, so the Motsenko game I was mentioning where he was maybe trying to create a fortress, it looks like he actually really succeeded. Because not only, we talked about the position where White had the F2 pawn. Well, guess what? That F2 pawn is gone. Remember that G pawn he could have taken off many times earlier? He is really regretting leaving that guy on the board. Because now this pawn is very dangerous. Obviously, this is not going to be lost unless he does something. He could play Queen H1 check. He could do anything if White wants to draw. But to win this game, with this rook being so solid, this pawn being so far advanced, I seriously doubt there are any winning chances for White at this point. So a really nice save by Motsenko, who remains actually the only, and they did draw, in fact. They just agreed to a draw. So he remains actually the only undefeated player in both events thus far. A lot of decisive games, and he saved one. He was in big trouble today, so I'm sure he's glad just to skate by with the draw.
Alrighty. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have Tata Abrahamian here. She will be taking a look at her game here on USChessChamps.com for the 2nd day in a row. We're always pleased to have her on the air with us. So we'll see you in about 30 seconds for the conclusion of today's round and all of the exciting wrap-ups.
Don't go too far.
Question on Twitter from Damas. I should not have pronounced that. That was a bit of a trap, yeah?
For those of you who are new to chess, it might look like ba3 is an illegal move here because White advances pawn 2 squares, not 1. But it's a little something we call en passant. And you can do that, but you have to do it instantly. You can't wait for a move, like let's say play king e7, king g2, and now try, because could I do it?
I'm sorry. This is too funny for words.
This is a software glitch? I'm pretty sure there's not allowed.
Lawrence. Hello, Lawrence. Yeah, I'll play 4 against Lawrence. And now he's going to play something against me which we discussed at length during the course of my stay. Yeah, he told me this is excellent. d5, this was what I was kind of hoping for, because now I think e5 is quite strong. No, Lawrence, this is not how chess works. Sadly, it would be much, much more fun if chess actually worked like this. But I don't think it does. Or maybe it does. Well, that's me regretting what I just said. How did I get from there to here is a little bit beyond me. And what's worse, I will never hear the end of it. My quality of life has just gone downhill tremendously because I'm actually sharing the office with the guy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. As you can see, Ben Simon has gone somewhere, but luckily, he's been replaced by Tata Abrahamian, who is now one of the co-leaders of the event. Congratulations on your game.
Thank you.
Want to take us through it?
I'm not really sure what happened in my game. So if we go to the opening where he played knight d2.
So Queen's Indian. Have you seen this opening before?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost every round I'm facing this. Maybe next game I'm playing white, but maybe
to future opponents, do something else, guys. Come on.
Because I'm not gonna do something else.
Come on. Come up with something new, really. So, all normal stuff so far. Rook c1, d6, d5. So this is all fairly normal, I assume.
So e5.
e5.
So I don't know if I should play a5 or not, but I wanted to keep the option of c6 open without my pawn hanging.
I don't think it can be really too bad, because a5 and knight c5 are where you want your pieces. b4 is sometimes an option, so it doesn't seem like you have to be in a huge rush.
Yeah, I thought he would go knight e1, knight e3, but he played f4, and then that kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah, knight e1, knight e3, just to show d3 looks weird, but the idea is that this knight is actually very nice, because it controls these squares if you want to play f4, it controls these squares if you want to play b4. So in general, in these positions, this tends to be the nice square for the knight. So after knight d2, yeah?
So knight d7, f4, yeah, and then here, this is where I spend a lot of time, because I never want to take, because then his rook is ready to swing over to the king side. f5 looks dangerous, because take, bishop h2 is coming in.
So you didn't want to take because of rook takes?
No,
or
g takes, and then rook will swing over.
So you cover this square, this rook swings over. I know you prefer to play rook lifts yourself rather than allow them.
Yeah, I mean, there's too many pieces by my king, and my bishop won't be out of the game. I have no pieces.
I would agree, but
I mean, I got a little scared. I don't know if objectively there's anything, but...
But I mean, I don't know. These f5 attacks, I think, tend to be... Usually there's a way to deal with them, especially with as long as you have ways to open the center, and that's what you chose to do. You played c6.
Yeah, so I thought I should play in the center.
So a4, I really hated this move. I didn't...
He didn't want to allow b5, probably, because it is going to be my next move. It doesn't react. Yeah, so takes,
I suppose, but this move has to be I think it's the worst option. So it takes. I was surprised he took with e-pawn also, but
no,
I guess c-pawn is not ideal, yeah. Yeah, honestly, I think f4 was a bit ambitious, but okay.
So takes, knight of...
Yeah, now pawn takes doesn't make sense because of the pawn structure.
Yeah, knight e5, knight f2. Yeah, so this is another moment. I wasn't sure if I should trade knights or play rook e8 because...
So were you worried about potential knight d4 and trying to occupy some
So I wasn't
squares?
sure if my knight is good enough compared to his knight because my bishop is just terrible. But I thought maybe I should trade and then I'll have... I thought as soon as I force him to play b3, I'm going to put a queen on c5 and I can never lose that position.
Yeah.
Because I have weaknesses and he doesn't, so...
Makes sense. I thought you might try bishop c8 to d7
I
at
didn't
some
have
point,
time to
but
do it.
never quite time. I thought even here you could maybe try it. Because honestly, I'm not afraid of takes because then the queen gets the square, but I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. But like if I take, my plan was to do that, but then I'm not in time.
Takes. So here if you try to play bishop c8, something happens?
Bishop c8, yes, I think. Yeah, he just goes rook e3 and then...
okay, so... Wait. Yeah, I mean, I can see how there would be problems because you want to play queen c7.
And then I can because rook e7 is kind of like, I just feel uncomfortable. So
a little bit, okay.
So I thought bishop a6, my bishop doesn't want to be there, but it's very, not precise, but it's concrete.
Yeah.
So c4 is always hanging, so you cannot just do whatever. And
yeah, so queen f2 kind of sneaky, right? Trying to come in this way. So you played bishop a6, which looks weird, but the idea is just to make sure this is always hanging, right? And if you provoke b3, you at least never have to worry about.
Yeah, because here if I play bishop c8, he's just going to play it at rook e, maybe rook e3. And now I don't have bishop d7 because rook e7, and then if I don't do that, then he's going to play rook fe4, and he gets the file, and that position is definitely not going to be good for me.
So you wanted to distract him a little bit.
So I thought here I have to play very precise and crazy. So he played rook b3, I defended.
Yeah, rook b3 I thought was weird. Like I really thought he would try b3, rook e3, and just kind of focus on this file maybe.
Well, b3 I thought just rook e8, queen c5, and I thought I just can't lose there. Yeah,
but I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like he's actually should be playing for advantage maybe, but I don't know. I mean, it's kind of I thought that here he had to settle down though. b3, rook e3, and kind of keep things together. This looked very strange. Rook b3, rook b8. I mean, I thought that this was very risky. Rook e4, and now you played f5.
Because the rook was annoying.
The rook's annoying?
Yeah, so the rook now has to stay somewhere in the fort, which No, he played rook e6, yeah.
He played rook
now,
e1.
Yeah, but now c4 hangs. Like I can never take like bishop.
Yeah, he
c4
doesn't really want to move on the 4th, does he? So
yeah.
f5, maybe this move took him by surprise. Because honestly,
took
here I already.
surprise.
Yeah, but this is why again I really thought he had to put the pawn on b3. This looks a little too loose. So rook e1, played queen c5. So you're happy to trade queens, of course. Just so you guys are aware, if takes, I assume b takes, and then. Takes, and the problem is there's no time to get this pawn solidly here because it gets captured. This is also attacked. I guess white could try rook e6, but even
I can just go rook b6.
Even rook b6,
yeah,
maybe b3, but I don't know.
B3 can give some bishop c8 again. I think. It's just not,
this rook is not a permanent guest.
No.
Okay, so bishop f1. So yeah, here I thought your position was just quite good. You played f4. G4.
Yeah, here weirdness. So I want queen c7 because I thought his king is weak and I shouldn't trade queens anymore.
So you basically were like, you know what? I'm gonna
checkmate.
Now I'm gonna checkmate you. Okay.
Yeah, but then after next move I went g5 and now I thought, okay, now my king.
Now you wish your queen was back on c5.
Yeah. And now that my king is actually really weak.
I know.
Oh, actually, if we go back to f4.
Yeah.
Yeah, go back one more move. Can he take on c5?
So it takes. I assume b takes. No?
Yeah. So take on b8. And then I thought he has rook e6, and then just like everything's hanging. So now I have rook b6, it just takes on.
So rook e6, so the idea is if you play this move, then he takes
my pawn. Which I also thought maybe it's not the end of the world, but might be.
This looks a little bit annoying though, for sure.
So here I thought I can actually take on g3.
So it takes g3.
So here I had a sneaky move. So take on d6. I thought I can take on h2. So you cannot take because take with a check. So king h1. And I thought I have rook f8.
Can you still take this pawn and play here?
Oh yeah, okay. I didn't see that. Yeah.
So it takes here and I don't know. It still doesn't look completely clear to me. There's rook takes a5. Takes check, the c pawn hangs. I mean, I don't think you're better. So probably, maybe f4 was premature because of this.
Yeah, I don't think f4 was a good move. I realized it right after I played it.
Because you can always take with the d pawn, but that looks very, very awkward. So maybe he missed the shot here. Because g4, after this, I thought your position had to be excellent. I was surprised you played queen c7. I thought you might even just play g5 to start, but but okay, queen c7. G5.
Yeah, and I thought this position is just crazy.
Yeah, queen d7, but honestly, it looks like his king is just as weak as yours. The key is just can you get your pieces in.
I thought the key is going to be whose king is weaker. Actually, I'm not sure my king is safer than his, but the way the game turned out, I guess it was.
But you did take on a4, so you couldn't have been too worried about your king. But it's understandable.
So
you need to get
I had
in.
like 2 minutes.
So at this point, it's kind of like, but you seem to outplay him in the mutual time scramble. I assume he was somewhat limited on time, or did he have some?
He got low on time.
Okay.
So he missed something.
But you're used to being low on time.
Yeah,
you're comfortable there.
So here he missed, so take, queen g5. I almost missed it to rook g7. So he forgot that he cannot take on h7 and play rook g1.
So just to show you guys how this works, it looks like you're pinning the queen to the king, but you can take this rook check and grab this rook, and that's a few too many pieces. Again, it seems like a simple tactic, but at the same time, when you're low on time, you can miss anything. You really can.
Yeah, but I have bishop g4. So okay.
Bishop g4 where?
So bishop h7.
Oh, instead?
Yeah, so bishop h7, rook h7, rook g1, I just have bishop g4. And now you cannot take on g4 because queen g4.
Oh, rook h4 wasn't good enough?
What are you talking about?
Oh, because the...
What are you talking about? I'm down a queen.
Yeah, for some reason in my mind this rook was not defended.
No, bishop d4.
Alright, so here...
So here I go bishop g4.
Takes rook g1 and you have bishop g4. So now if rook takes, you can take this rook.
Yeah.
And
now
this rook
h4
cannot take. If takes, king takes. Just too much.
Yeah. So he didn't realize he can't. Well, he thought he could do this, and then he saw I have bishop g4.
So he played rook g1 instead, but now you enter an endgame, which should be comfortably winning.
So I thought maybe rook h6 here, but I guess I have check on rook g6.
So the idea is that.
Oh, but maybe rook h3 here.
Rook h4, rook h3. Maybe you have rook g3, but
and then rook h6.
Yeah, I thought you might you'd have to pitch that guy anyway, but...
I'm just bring my king.
Maybe. Let's see. But I just hung my queen, so don't be careful. Yeah. So it takes...
No, but now I'm losing...
King.
Okay, but now this is not so clear, I think, no?
I would agree.
Oh, I just bring...
But I don't know. I mean, your king comes up. It looks like...
Yeah, no, this is...
But it's definitely a better try.
Yeah.
Because what happened in the game was pretty straightforward. This rook is just out of play. No doubt taking this pawn is always going to simply get to a lost king and pawn endgame. So it's never really an option for white. So yeah. And here you seem to... Once you activated your rook, it seems fairly straightforward. Yeah. And here there was one last trick, but luckily when you're up 3 pawns, you have some leeway.
Just enough pawns to win this.
Yeah, and there are many ways to win such positions. You can run your king over to the queen side. It's fairly simple, but you can also do kind of what you did. And yeah, here you could play a3. You could even bring your king over. You have plenty of options.
I mean, I just completely forgot about
but
that
h2,
little
and this
trick.
is a very common trick for those of you at home. So the idea is rook takes, and I think I mentioned this already. If rook a2 check, king f3, do not take that rook. It will be stalemate.
So this is one of the ways you hold when you're playing against f1h pawns.
It is. This trick is actually very important. And oftentimes black tries to shift the king here, so then you check and go behind just to make sure the king is on the perfect square.
Like I was wondering, what is he doing? I thought he was going to resign any moment, and he took, and
exactly.
that was very unpleasant. But of course, like I have thankfully I have an f pawn
And
now.
here I also showed that there's a trick, which is that if a2, rook f2, and all of a sudden life is not so simple. The idea being you give check and go back, and if you approach the pawn, you take here, and now check. This is not quite Vancura. It's something unnamed as far as I know, but it is a draw because you always have these checks and go back.
Yeah, but I saw that.
But of course, you did not fall for it. And now there are tricks, but they're kind of half-hearted tricks.
Yeah, I mean here there are no tricks. I mean here I can just
you can do anything you want, but you decided to do it by force. I thought you'd play rook h1, but you played rook f2. Even a little quicker. Even a little quicker. So a crazy game, again, a time pressure scramble, but you again, found your way through, tied for the lead. What are your feelings going into tonight's round?
I don't know, I guess I'm not going to play another Queen's Indian, so that's exciting.
Because you get white.
Yeah.
You might end up in one anyway. Who do you play tonight?
I'm not sure.
We'll find. We'll be sure to find out before the show wraps up.
Sure.
So actually, speaking of, we're going to actually look at the pairings for the last round. So why don't we, not the last round, but tonight's round, why don't we take a look for round 7. In the GM norm section, Akshat Chandra, white against Bartholomew. Daniel Gurevich, who almost got a win, but not quite, white against Boros. Vorontsov, white against Solakidu, one of the leaders. Mark Parag WA, white against Hamrakulov. And our Tatev, you are playing Adi Patel as white. You get the white pieces. No Queen's Indian for you tonight. That must feel good. And he did just get a win, though, so against Parag WA, so he's going to be feeling pretty confident. But again, should be pretty interesting.
He's probably also in a must-win situation, right, to get a norm.
To get a norm, yeah. So this is a weird situation in the tournament because people can be leading the tournament or they can be doing well, but oftentimes they're chasing a specific score. For you, it's 6. For Stavrula, it's 6. But for everyone else, they need 6.5, which is a lot of points for a GM norm. So you can find yourself in must-win situations where in a normal tournament you would not be. However, a lot of people are still just trying to play good chess, so not so much. Let's check out the IM norm pairings for round 7. Yep, so Motsenko, who barely survived, now gets white against Luis Torres.
Oh, his teammate.
Indeed, and actually Luis just lost a tough game to Jobava. So Jobava is trying to play for first place. He gets white against Stearman. And the other pairings also, we have Tansel Turgut trying to bounce back against Chi Yu. Josh Kolas trying to keep his run going against Garbinski, who barely was not able to beat Motsenko. And then Brandon Jacobson, still kind of on the bad luck train, gets white against Justin Wang, who's trying to also make the most of his tournament. So plenty of great games tonight. We will not be there to watch them with you, but be sure to tune in on uschesschamps.com. Any last thoughts?
No, that's it.
That's it. We're done thinking for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Tune in tomorrow at 2 p.m. on US Chess Champs. We will be back to catch round 8 action live. And don't miss it. So hope you guys enjoyed the show. We'll see you tomorrow.